youth, when I was younger, I think I remember the one in blue. Well, what a turn of events, huh? A man has to die before he's recognized as one of New Bern's most illustrious characters. Marcus Cicero Stanley, at your service. And yes, one of the Stanleys. Not that Mother would allow me back in the house anytime soon. A stain on the family name, as she threw me out at the tender age of 16. Well, not that the name was so stellar. After all, there was that incident with Father and Governor Spates. After Mother threw me out, I had to find a fortune, didn't I? And I found one in Texas. Unfortunately, it belonged to one of our housemates. I took that money. The next morning, when the money was discovered missing, the master of those funds was looking for someone to blame. Well, was it my fault? I said that there was going to be the other gentlemen in the house were equally as interested in the money. Is it my fault that angers ensued? Was it my fault that a duel was fought? And it is certainly not my fault that a young man's life was snuffed out. Well, not wishing to associate with that type of person anymore, I left town. I found myself in a town which would appreciate my particular talents, and that would be New York City. I worked very hard there. One of the things I did was testify in court for a small remuneration. You would be amazed how much money someone will pay for a positive testimony in court. Well, once again, I worked hard. I developed businesses. I worked for a bank, believe it or not. And I rose in the social strata of New York. I married the daughter of a wealthy socialite. When I left this life, I left two things: a fortune and a lawsuit. Yeah, well, you see, a young woman of my youth appeared saying that she was the one and only Mrs. Stanley. Well, the court favored my wife, of course, because that young woman did not have a marriage certificate. As a matter of fact, she said I burnt that marriage certificate, saying our love and our children were enough to prove the case in court. Well, madam, do I look like somebody who does not know the meaning of paperwork in this world? Well, you know, there's a lot of people out there waiting to see me. So I'm going to quote Mr. P.T. Barnum when I say, always leave them wanting more. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Anyone see which way the young one went?
Please exit the same way you came in. Watch your step.
Oh my goodness! It's wonderful to be among the living again. It's been a long time for us. But when I look around New Bern nowadays, I hardly recognize where I am.
Back when I was alive, there was a Catholic church and school behind us here on Bern Street. Bet you didn't know that. Yes, indeed, it was called St. Joseph's Parish and School, and it provided a fine education and Catholicism to the colored people of this area.
They don't say colored people anymore.
What?
They don't say colored people anymore. They are respectfully referred to as African American. Where have you been, under a rock or something?
Well, I've been dead. My apologies, my good people.
That's better. Well, it seems like only yesterday the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary arrived from Scranton, Pennsylvania and set the wheels in motion. That was in 1926. My, how time flies.
Yeah, back then, Roman Catholics of any color were a rare breed here in North Carolina. Amazingly, 23 African-American children registered for classes that very first day, and only one of them was Catholic. It was unbelievable that 90 children enrolled that very first year.
And St. Joseph's Parish continued to grow and prosper. And some years later, they built a convent for sisters next door, right over there.
St. Joseph's taught classes all the way through high school, providing the African-American population in this area with a fine education. I should know, being a Catholic school graduate myself.
Yet those nuns didn't put up with any nonsense, and the parents supported them in every way. I can tell you that.
I guess you could say those nuns didn't tolerate any bad habits. Get it? Habits.
Well, times were changing for the better. In 1962, Bishop Waters decided to desegregate the parishes, and he combined St. Joseph's with the white parish, St. Paul's. For some years thereafter, the high school continued.
But then it was renamed William Gaston Catholic High School, named for William Gaston, the 19th century Navy New Bernian. You know who he was, a very important man. He was a congressman and a justice in the North Carolina Supreme Court.
And he wrote our state song, the Old North State. Hurrah, hurrah, the Old North State forever, hurrah.
Excuse me, as I was saying, William Gaston was known as the father of Catholicism here in North Carolina. This was the very first integrated high school in all of North Carolina. It's a shame it couldn't continue. It closed years ago back in 1969. Now the state owns that property.
But if you exit this way through the back, you can catch a glimpse of this church and school for yourself.
Well, y'all have a fine evening, and
Do watch out for wandering ghosts.
Thank you. She's lost her home, and she has found her new home here in this home.
Hello, my name is Lucinda Stanley, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born a slave. My father was white, and my mother, just like me, was a slave. We were purchased by a wealthy white man, an auctioneer named Allen Eubanks. He bought me, my mother, and my sister Abby. At first, I was just a housekeeper, but Mr. Eubanks, well, he took a liking for me. He loved me dearly. Matter of fact, we had 13 children together. But with the medicine, what it was back then meant that many of my children died young. I had one son, his name was George. And ladies, when I tell you how proud of a mother is of her children, well, George went up north to study architecture. However, in the meantime, his father, Mr. Eubanks, passed away. And might I say, he left me a very wealthy woman with a great deal of property. And when George came back to New Bern, I had him build and design for me a fine building on the corners of Middle and Broad Street. And at some time, it was rented by the Caleb Bradham's Pharmacy. You may remember his name. Why, he was the one who invented Pepsi Cola. Over the years, the building then became the Williams Cafe. And sometime in the 1950s, a man who would become a famous entertainer. What was his name? Elvis Presley. He ate lunch there before performing a show at the Masonic Theater. And today there is now a popular restaurant held within the building, which I believe is called the Chelsea. George, my son. He applied to the state to be declared white. After all, his grandfather and father both were, but unfortunately, it did not work out. So George left, and I remained here in New Bern at my house on Broad Street, which is now gone. Now, as a wealthy woman, I had many rental properties. But did you know that because of the law back then, I, as a colored woman, was not allowed in the front doors of my very own buildings? I had to walk through the back door just to collect my rent. And when I passed in 1926, did you know that there were stories and rumors going around that I was buried in the Greenwood Cemetery? Now that's the colored cemetery here in town. And that my children dug my body up and took me to the Cedar Grove Cemetery. Now that's the white cemetery here in town. But to tell you the truth, I was buried in the Cedar Grove Cemetery all along, right beside Mr. Eubanks and our children, George included. And my service was held quietly at dusk because after 1913, only whites were allowed to be buried there. And if you go to the cemetery and you look for the Eubanks plot, you'll see my name and epitaph on the tombstone facing the Neuse River. Maybe that was just to keep the peace. You guys have a great night, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Nathan, you out there? No, I didn't think so. He wouldn't want to see me anyway, seeing as I was one of the ones what helped get him killed. Oh, but I'm sorry. Being dead is no excuse for poor manners. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is William Pendergrass. When I was alive, I was a sailor. And the last ship that I sailed on was the sloop Whitsian. Oh, she was a fine ship, and she was owned by Mr. Abraham Nathan. Mr. Abraham Nathan had done right well for himself in life, and he was also part of a small Jewish community right here in New Bern. Now, Mr. Nathan had done business in North Carolina and in South Carolina as a merchant and as a shipper. Well, in October of 1787, we was on a trip down to Charleston on the Betsy, and along with all the other stuff that Mr. Nathan had brought along to sell, he also had a big old trunk filled up with about $500 in French crowns and Spanish dollars, and whew, buddy, that's more money than I've ever seen in my life, or even more money than I could hope to make in a lifetime. And the ship's master, a scoundrel by the name of Rogers, and some of the other crew members, well, we kindly figured that maybe that money might be better served in our possession and with Mr. Nathan out of the way. But we figured we'd wait until we got out onto the open ocean before doing anything about it. Well, don't you know, as soon as we was out on the high seas, then Mr. Rogers, he come a-sneaking up behind Mr. Nathan with a big old solid sassafras root, and he whopped Mr. Nathan right upside the head with it, and Mr. Nathan, he fell to the deck with a real sickening thud, and then Rogers, he hit him twice more with that big old root, and it was pretty clear then that Mr. Nathan, he was done for, but he was still breathing. So one of the other mates, they tied a big old iron plot to his wrist, and they just throwed him overboard. Just throwed him overboard. Well, I had no idea this is what they was talking about or how this was going to go. And I recognized what y'all would call in shock, because I was standing there with my mouth gaping open like I was catching flies or something. And the other crew members could see how upset I was by this whole thing. And they offered me a whole bunch of that money to keep my trap shut. And yes, I'm sorry to say I took that money. But you know, money only soothes the soul for so long, and I could not shake the image of poor Mr. Nathan laying there out of my head, and my conscience started weighing on me something terrible, and well, I confessed. Now, I gotta admit, by confessing, I thought maybe I'd get off kindly easy, but she didn't work out that way, because in June of 1788, Mr. Rogers and the crew members and myself, well, we was all hanged up by our necks until we was dead for our crimes. So now, ever since then, I've been looking for Mr. Nathan. I'd like to talk to him. I want to tell him how sorry I am about all this, and I ain't expecting forgiveness, but I was hoping that maybe by confessing to him too, that maybe this poor old hooligan soul might be able to rest a bit. And that's why I haunts this area down here by the synagogue now. Now, it's just down over yonder ways, a couple of blocks or so. And it weren't even here when Mr. Nathan and I walked the earth. But I figured if his spirit ever made it back up here to New Bern, maybe this is where he'd want to go. And I ain't found him yet. 229 years now. I tell you what, was y'all wandering around New Bern tonight, if y'all was having to bump into Mr. Nathan, would y'all take pity on this poor old miserable lost soul of mine and tell him where he could find me, because I got to talk to him. Thank you. Mr. Nathan, Mr. Nathan.
She married William Penix. They had a daughter named Nettie. She married Paul Cox, and their daughter Ruth, Dr. Ruth Cox is the current resident of this house. So it's impressive. 4 generations since the house was built in 1880. It's been in the same family for 137 years. Impressive.
Oh, well, hello. Oh, just make sure there was no one hiding behind me. I don't believe we've met. There are so many of you. My name is Nettie Watson. It certainly is nice to be back in my home once more. I see y'all are enjoying it as well. When I was alive, gorgeous home lined Pollock Street. Of course, in my opinion, my home was, and still is, the most impressive. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, that's why you're here.
So, my dear Mr. Watson had this home built for us in 1882. It's what you call Italianate style. It's very popular here in New Bern. Charles passed away in 1906, and at that time it became the property of my daughter Ruth Penix and me. As you know, time and taste, they change, and a few years later, she decided to add that lovely neoclassical portico to the front with the impressive columns that y'all walked through. And then a few years later, she added the porte cochere to the side. I think you call it a carport nowadays. A porte cochere. Carport. I don't know where it went out of favor. It's enough about architecture. What's really important are the people who live in their homes. After my daughter and I passed on, my granddaughter Nettie and her family lived here. Nettie was married to Paul Cox, such a handsome man. He was the mayor of New Bern. And when the descendants of Baron de Graffenried, you do know who Baron de Graffenried is, don't you? The founder of New Bern. So, when the descendants came to visit, it was Paul and Nettie who entertained them right here in this very room. I was so proud. Well, I'm very fortunate that my great-granddaughter, Dr. Ruth Cox, still lives here. So when I come back for visits, I'm still visiting family. I could talk about family for an eternity if you have time. No. I know y'all have a long evening, and I see y'all have been thoroughly impressed by my most magnificent home, so I will let you go, and I hope you do have an enjoyable rest of your evening. Thank you for visiting. Thank you. Thank you.
I never ran in her circle.
But we're so excited to see her.
She's not exactly very humble with the home that she was brought to on this visit, though.
Let me bring her out so you can meet her yourself.
Why, there are so many of you. Be a dear, please, and hold my lamp while I tell my story. And who are you?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Catherine.
Thank you. Welcome. I am Mary Vale Jones Wilson Moore. Though in my day, I certainly needed no introduction, for everyone knew Madam Mary Moore. In those days, Madam was a title of distinction and respect for ladies of the highest station and the greatest wealth. They named Madam Moore Lane after me. I suppose you're wondering about my names, and I shall tell you. I was married 3 times, once for love, once for wealth, and once for ambition, though not exactly in that order. And ladies, you have much to thank me for I am responsible for the prenuptial agreement. I made sure that my children from previous marriages did not lose their inheritances to my future husbands. My daughter, Elizabeth Wilson, married Richard Spate. She was the mother of Richard Dobbs Spate, and the grandmother of Richard Dobbs Spate, Jr., both former governors of the state of North Carolina. Her father, William Wilson, my second husband, and I built the beautiful Claremont plantation across the Trent River. Daily, I would come to New Bern on a barge, rowed by liveried oarsmen. Here, I would attend to my social and to my spiritual obligations. Well, it was with my influence that the first Christ Church was built. And I owned the grandest stall there, or pew, as you might say today. It is my understanding that in later years, 2 presidents, George Washington and James Monroe, visited Christ Church and used my fine pew. But when I died in 1764, I was buried at my beloved Claremont, not at Christ Church, and not at Orton Plantation. Orton Plantation near Wilmington belonged to my third husband, Roger Moore. I am buried in the Spate family plot at Claremont on Madam Moore Lane. And this part of the story pains me to say. However, unfortunately, my plantation house there was destroyed during the War of Northern Aggression. Rebels, Yankees, and my beautiful home lost forever. Well, anyway, I was a very wealthy woman, and I'm sure you've heard of my riches. But have you heard the story of my gold? Gold, said to be buried on the land that was once Claremont. So let me ask you, should you go in search of my treasure? Please, spare my grave. Thank you for coming.
Okay, let's make sure. Good evening, folks. How are you guys doing today?
Wonderful.
Just to let you guys know, my name is Lawrence Davis, and this is the Lawrence Davis house. A little backstory on this house. I didn't live here.
Okay.
I know, right? Good start. Oh, thank you. I'll give you guys a little more. Now, this was actually a shop at one time when I first was living here in New Bern, and then after that, it was actually sold to a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Davis. And I do commend his parents on having a good taste in name, very classy. It wasn't me, I never did live here, but I did decide to come out because I was told there was a ghost walk happening here, and I was told that I should come out to this house and at least tell a little bit of my story of the real Lawrence Davis. Now, to let you know, I lived here in New Bern a little bit before the Civil War, around 1859. And times got hard, and I got a little bit behind on my taxes. And New Bern actually had a law that stated, as a freedman, as I was a freeman, that I had the ability to work on the streets 2 days for every dollar owned in taxes. So New Bern sent the Constable Edward Hart, to come and serve me with those papers and to give him any reason on why I could not work on the street to pay my due. Now, Constable Hart did not only just serve me with the papers, but he tried to arrest me. And who knows what would have happened if I would have went peacefully like some sort of animal. So I hit him. So I was taken to the courts here in New Bern where I was found guilty. Now, I did not stand for that ruling, and I appealed to the highest court in North Carolina, where Judge Pearson reigned over that in Raleigh. Now, Judge Pearson reminded me that as a freeman, I cannot go around hitting a white man as I please. As none of you guys can do that, because that's still wrong, that's bad. No one should go around doing that. He also reminded the folks that I am a third-class party person. And as a third-class person, I still have natural-born rights. And one of those rights being self-defense. And Judge Pearson ruled that I was innocent of all my charges because I was only applying my natural-born right of self-defense against an unlawful arrest because the constable was only supposed to serve me with papers and not arrest me. Now, throughout history, apparently, my case has actually helped other freed persons, persons of color and persons of non-color, with their court cases, as you see, because we're all humans and we're all people. And, well, I hope that you guys have learned a little something about me and that you guys can take that and tell others a little bit about me.
Good.
Good, okay. Making sure. Now, if you guys don't mind, follow me. I'll take you guys right out this way right here where you guys can enjoy some of the other tales of people who are alive and around.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Well, good night and good morning. Good evening, everybody. Are you all here to help me paint?
Sure.
Why not? Sure, why not? Well, I only got 3 paint brushes. But let me tell you, let me introduce myself. My name is Josephine Miller. And I'm a house painter by trade. Ain't too many of those house painters, female house painters anyway, in the late 1950s. Mr. What's his name? He's the man that owns this here big house. He told me it was a big job, but I'll tell you, it is a big job, but I ain't sure gonna share my money with y'all, that's for sure. Now, have y'all been over to visit that there palace? It's just opened, you know, and Miss Gertrude Caraway, she's the woman, she's the lady that's in charge. Well, ladies, I hear she's looking for some hostesses to lead the tours. If you're into that kind of thing, I ain't, but if you're into that kind of thing, you can do that. Now, I ain't visited the palace and I ain't gonna do it. You see, I sure know Sourpuss, but those people over on Metcalf were not happy about moving their homes. And those people over on George Street, they was not happy about losing their businesses and their living. So, I don't know. I ain't just gonna go to that palace. But they did say that you tourists, you're gonna help spend the money here in town and you will repay for all those expenses. Well, maybe you don't look like locals to me. Maybe you're tourists with maybe a few locals done mixed in and you don't know the area that well. So let me explain it to you, okay? Are y'all familiar with the Watson House over there on Pollock and Metcalf Street? Oh, sure. It's a big white house with great big white pillars on it. It's kind of up from the ground a little bit in case of flooding. It's not low on the ground like most of them. Well, tell you, George Street that ran, and that's the area with Metcalf and George Street I am talking about. Well, George Street used to run all the way to the Trent River. And at the foot of the Trent River was the Trent River Bridge. You see, all that had to go. They done demolished it lock, stock, and barrel. All the way to the ground, I tell you. Sad day in New Bern. Sad, sad day in New Bern. But those people that lost their neighborhoods, so sad. Well, those people over there, I tell you, they ain't no hooligans. And they ain't cause no trouble. They just kind of express themselves kind of strongly, if you know what I mean, about losing their neighborhoods and having to be moved out. Well, I did hear from one man that asked me to keep a secret, so I'm gonna tell you. You see, he likes his new house a mighty fine. He likes his new house, but you wanna know why? Because it has indoor plumbing. But he doesn't want his neighbors to know he likes his new house, so shh. Josephine Miller, she didn't tell you that little secret. You got that, so shh, keep that secret. Well, they still say that all the tourists that come into town are going to help repay for all that expenses. You're going to spend money here in New Bern. You're going to help rebuild George Street and Metcalf Street. You're going to pay for all those houses that had to move out of that area down there. But one place I forgot to tell you about. You see, down there where that brick wall is, I even lived there one time. You see, I rented a room from a widow lady. Nice room. But she was none too happy about moving and losing her friends in her neighborhood neither. Well, so you see, it's important y'all come and spend money here so we can pay for all that. Well, see these two rooms here? They're kind of a big job, and I sure ain't gonna, spend a lot of time talking to y'all because, as you can tell, I got to get back to work. So y'all have a good night now, and excuse me, I need to get some more paint. Thank you.